I realize I look like I stepped out of a time portal from 2005 based on the overabundance of light on my face and just generally the way my hair and makeup is done. So it's a great thing we're starting with the Flash tonight live to chat about the TV that we watched this week. Words are hard. But we're gonna start with the time travel-y one, and that's gonna excuse my appearance. Welcome, Kate and Carey. I hear one of you has watched tonight's episode of The Flash, and one of you loves yourself. Stunning commentary.
Mhm.
I'm wondering if you guys have any news this week before we dive right in, or should we just dive right in?
I don't
I
have
don't
any
know.
news.
I don't know if it's news, but I'm assuming you've heard about SnyderCon. Is that right or no?
I think I did. I saw a tweet about a New Yorker article type of vibe. That's a cut to Knives Out.
And essentially, and I don't know how big news it is, but essentially, Zack Snyder is it's a fundraiser, so money's going for good cause.
Okay.
But it is sort of a stream of like his three movies. I think it's like a grand total, all three streams is like $475, right?
Oh
But you
wow.
get
Okay.
like this, you get the stream of it. Yeah, you get the stream of it. You get like Q&A, and it's sort of in person kind of deal. Um, Big deal in that people still love Zack Snyder and were willing to pay $475 for that experience. But good lord, man, I know it's raising money for suicide prevention. That's a whole lot.
That's really cool. Well, I'm glad that there's money being raised for a good cause. I'm glad that people will enjoy themselves, and I'm sure if you like that kind of thing, it'll be exactly the kind of thing you will like, as it were. I I think that sounds fun. I'm very pro con. I feel like the best energy in the world is at cons. I love being in a space where people like care way too much about things because I also care way too much about things. So such a positive, good environment, even if it's like, I'm not the biggest Snyder stan, but I'm also not even close to the biggest Snyder anti. So, you win some, you lose some. I did see Batman versus Superman in theaters opening the night before opening night, whatever it was.
I like to call that movie Batman versus Superman Enter the Wonder Woman, but that's just she was the best thing about it.
Agreed. Ooh, I do have one tiny piece of news. Speaking of, these just continuing on this annoying flex of watching movies ahead of time. This time last week, I watched the latest or the only, I guess, Dungeons and Dragons movie that just came out, Honor Amongst Thieves. The latest, the only.
Hmm.
Yeah, it was great. It was cool. A lot of good female characters, which is really nice. I was really worried about that going into it because I did not pay attention to anything leading up to it, and the theater was like entirely male. It was embarrassing, but fantastic. And Michelle Rodriguez, I believe it was, plays a really excellent character in it. So great. And also, I realized after the fact, a franchise we all know and love, Shadow and Bone. Um, there's a chick in the Dungeons and Dragons movie. She was like the evil, the bad lady, whatever. From
Mhm.
Shadow and Bone. What's her name? Jenya. Pretty girl.
Mhm.
Yeah. So it's super cool.
Very different characters.
Very different characters, but excellent nonetheless. Both associated with the color red. So, some consistency there. Well, if that's
Mhm.
all for news, let's dive into The Flash. Now, Carrie, I know you are a busy guy. You've been hopping around a bit, and you did not have the opportunity to really treat yourself to watching the entire episode of The Flash. I hear you got bits and pieces of it, and you might have missed a little stint here and there. So, I'm just going to ask what you thought of what you did see. What questions were you left with? And do you feel like you missed much?
Well, here I'm hoping I missed much, right?
Okay.
Because here's what I saw. I saw sort of the initial teaser. I saw the part where Mark had the fever dream, I guess, or whatever you want to call it, about
Wet
Keone.
dream, perhaps.
Yeah, well, apparently so. That the bar or wherever they were, bits and pieces of that, and then saw the ending. So I feel like I got a full sort of arc of what
Yes.
their story was about. What I wanted, or at least what I hoped this episode offered, was it's supposed to be wildest dreams and an opportunity to explore sort of what if possibilities for, I don't know if it was just for Iris or for other characters or whatever, but that is what I was hoping this was. Tell me it was that, or I might be incredibly disappointed.
It was not that. Are you okay with me spoiling it? Because I'm about to spoil
Yeah,
it.
yeah, I'm gonna watch it anyway. Go right ahead.
Okay, your framework is absolutely correct. Because Iris kind of gets trapped in a dream, hand wavy how that happens. Nia, dreamer, is there, hand wavy how that happens. They're sharing this dream together, type of thing. We are left with this situation where we could see Iris imagining any number of realities or any number of futures for herself, some of which could be fabulous, delicious, interesting, right? She could be president, she could be, a famous rock star. We could get to see like all kinds of things. Let me just tell you what two futures or two presents or two realities she imagines. Number one, she's a cop. Let's just sit with that for a second. Right now in 2023, that was what they decided would be a really interesting future for her. She tackles a bad guy, never leaves the police station. It's exactly what you think. Number two, she is working at a Jitters as a barista, and I think like Barry also is a barista there. I think like we're supposed to believe like he's her manager or something like that, but they're also together. But she's just working at Jitters, exactly as you might recall how we saw her when this entire franchise kicked off. So those are the two things that she imagines for herself, both of which, by the way, would, for all intents and purposes, reflect essentially demotions, and that's kind of hard to compare across careers from where she is now, because we start this episode, as I think you mentioned you saw her, she's about to win a Pulitzer. And the other two futures for herself, she romanticizes those because she likes the idea of being able to like check out at 5 p.m. and like live her life away from work, which is like super fair. Work-life balance, we need a hobby. She needs a hobby. We had to, we went multiple seasons not even really seeing her have a job. So the idea of her having a job and a hobby just feels like we're, grasping at straws here. And they don't really, and I'm interested to hear your take when you actually, watch it. I don't feel like they really resolved that for her. I think we're just left with, it seems like a backdoor pilot for a Nia spinoff, which, we love a spinoff. That's great, whatever. It was extremely uninteresting to me. It did not appeal to me at all, the entire setup. It's not a knock to Nia the character. It's not a knock to, they bring in another character that would obviously be like her mentor, who seems extremely lovely, but the premise of the like dreamy thing just didn't appeal. There's no intrigue there for me as a viewer. But we end the Nia and Iris storyline basically just wrapping up Nia's bit and not really, in my opinion, giving Iris any real closure on this idea of wanting a better work-life balance or wanting, to care less what people think of her, because there's this bit where she sees people like talking about her behind her back, and it's like some of her, like employees or whatever, and they were talking about like, oh, of course she would, win a Pulitzer. She just gets all of her stories because she's sleeping with Barry, because she's, with Barry, that's how she gets it, whatever. And that's an unkind thing to say, but it's also an unkind thing to put in the script, because you put fair criticism in the script. And that's not kind. You know what I mean? It's the kind of thing somebody who does not like Iris would write into this. If you want to show somebody being kind of like unkind and her getting past it, it should be vaguely not true. We should see her employees saying like, oh, she's a, micromanager or something like that. And then it's like, that wasn't true. They're just like not a good employee or whatever the case may be. But saying that the majority of her stories are because she's with Barry is not fair criticism. Whether you like it or not, that's the reality. That's the premise of her character. And we who, like if we like her, we are supposed to believe that's completely fine. Same way Lois Lane, majority of her stories might have to do with proximity to Superman. And, with some characters, we just make our peace with that. And that's cool. That's part of their life. That's just reality. But it just felt like an unfair criticism to put in an episode that centers around her.
So this criticism from her, was it from her employees or coworkers or colleagues? Was that in real life?
Employee / coworker.
Mm-hmm. And that was in the sort of quote unquote real world of this episode.
So it was a dream, but we're led to believe that discussion, part of it could reflect an underlying truth. So it kind of devolves into a nightmare at the end where even people that she might love or care about, like Allegra, are kind of turning against her. And that's more nightmarish. But the setup of it, where you had that one like snooty girl and then you had that one random other guy, whatever, the setup of it up until that point reflects an underlying truth that they may be saying this kind of thing. And it just felt like, I don't know, it did not feel as supportive of her as a character as I would like it to be. There's a moment when we see something similar happen actually with Keone, the Caitlin Snow, pixie dream girl thing. So she has, this arc throughout this episode where what's his name, shirtless, blonde guy, whatever, is kind of like, I see Frost in you and therefore I'm in love with you. And she's like, that's not fair. You don't know me. And none of what you want to do, like go do karaoke, whatever, and drink. Like I don't drink and I don't do karaoke, whatever. And so they have this rift between them where he's, kind of hurting her by pressuring her into this situation that's not her, right? But they have this like little family dinner party at the end with like the Wests and Keone, like we see this every time, right? And she has to like step aside, which kind of like throws off the entire dinner party, to go like talk to blonde shirtless guy and then like come back, and she's sad. And because she's sad, it like freezes all the like food and water on the table. And it just felt like an unkind scene. You're making her seem like a quite literal killjoy, even though it's like, yeah, she's sad and she has a reason to be sad. It just like, just because something has a storyline around a female character that I like, or a female character that I'm like neutral towards but want the best for just on principle, does not mean it's good and positive. Anyways, that's all.
Here's what I would say first about the Iris storyline situation. About apparent, this seems to be the questioning of her journalism seems to be sort of like, if there had been some of that like sprinkled into some of the series before, right? Whether it, and say if it and I wouldn't expect that to come from her employees. I might expect that to sort of come from, say, it's a rival news outfit, right? A more mainstream news outfit, and I could see that those accusations being leveled against someone who essentially is on the flash beat, right? I think the benefit that Lois Lane gets is that she obviously had an opportunity to demonstrate her abilities before, quote unquote, the Superman beat, right? So I think that would have been, or could be, an interesting storyline to explore if it had been, hinted at before, or had been part of her story in the last couple of seasons, as opposed to the time sickness crap that we've had to deal with before. That would have been a much more professional storyline and interesting narrative for her in terms of, whether she feels like, or whether she has an opportunity or need to prove herself or whatever. I think that would have been fun to do, right?
Yeah.
But it just sort of, to your to what you said, it sort of feels like it's come out of left field. And hearing it, it sort of does, because I hadn't really heard that before.
Right. You
Yeah.
would think
So
that if she had that insecurity, she would have voiced that insecurity when she was repeatedly getting information from her father, chief of police, that was sort of behind the scenes information that he's talking to a journalist, whatever. More so, honestly, than Barry. I mean, we see her get information from Barry from time to time, but there was a good stint there where she didn't actually have a ton of scenes with Barry as much as she had with her father. And therefore, she was getting information from him. And ethics are completely kind of aside from this, to be honest, because again, we can excuse things in characters we like, or we'll see this when we get to Shadow and Bone. We can just like bad characters, and that's okay too, or characters who do bad things or whatever. It just felt like maybe not the best way to voice it. And then she, in response, didn't actually explore true ethical qualms with, like, oh, I do get all my information from Barry, but I've made my peace with that because I feel like it's a net win for the world. Or I do, but I also, have to fact check everything and do all this investigation. And it's still like a lot of, like there were a bunch of different directions they can take it. But it was interesting watching this back to back with this week's episode of Superman and Lois, where with this week's episode of Superman and Lois, we also see Lois on this sort of, work life, torn path where she needs treatment, but she also doesn't want to give up her job. It's not the same conflict, but it's the same theme of work-life balance. I'm curious what you thought of that. What did you think of this week's Soups and Low?
It was another award-winning episode, in my opinion.
Yeah.
It was. I'm not gonna lie. Sort of like watching the episode and seeing her, and I say her, seeing Lois blow off like treatment 2 times in a row. I was like treating. I don't want to say I sound like stupid. Say I was treating it like a real person, but I'm like, how could you, right? I'm looking at my screen and saying, how freaking could you do this?
Right.
But it's also about the things that makes her who she is, right? It's like, okay, I don't want to deal with this sort of vulnerability, but I know what I can do. I know what I want to do. I know what I need to do. And that's what she needs to do, right? And so you just sort of feel that, you sort of feel what she is in terms of being a reporter and in terms of searching for justice. You can sort of feel that in her bones, where you don't always feel that in quote unquote other characters who are portraying reporters on screen. And that's sort of what she is at her core, and to her own detriment sometimes. In fact, a lot of times, right? But just overall, I thought I was going to be a little, I was a little concerned when I got the impression, and obviously the confirmation that they were going to do a cancer storyline, because those things can be difficult in fantastical shows, right? Because it's such a real thing for so many people. And my initial concern was that, and I should not have had that concern with this show, but still it's CW, so you never know.
Yeah.
My initial concern was, are they going to trivialize this, right? And so far, I have gotten the distinct impression that they won't, because it was always a thought of, oh, well, we'll just go to the fortress and we'll have some Kryptonian cure for this, right?
Yeah,
like,
have her on a path of like a magic cure and she ends up pregnant, rather than having to go through the reality of like radiation and chemo.
Right. So I have a question for you. I'm interested in what you thought about when they decided to go with that story line. And then my question is this: do you think they would do the unthinkable with her character as a result of this?
I don't think they're going to kill her. But I do think that they seem to be on a path to showing her go through difficult treatment. They seem to be on a path where, we see in the promo for next week's episode, her, fainting or, whatever, showing signs of treatment. And I believe we're supposed to see that as like the day or two after her first round of chemo or something to that effect, where we understand, people are quite weak, whatever. I think we're going to see her go through that physical difficulty, but I think we're going to end the season with her in remission, and there's still going to be a realistic aspect to it. We're still going to see her weak. Next season, we're probably going to see her go in for like, the regular checkups and repeated scans, and we're going to see, maybe some sort of weakness or something to that effect afterwards. But I do think that they're going to actually end the season with her being like in remission or something to that effect.
And I could see that also. And I'll say this also, even though I just said that I don't think that the show would go the fantastical route, but what they just introduced in the last episode, basically Clark's Superman's blood being sort of a major plot point in the season. And we've seen what they have sort of done with this. I mean, quote unquote, necessarily sort of someone was terminal diagnosis and they were able to give them powers, and essentially it felt like a character died, and they seem to have been able to resuscitate him using this sort of concoction that they have. So I've got the suspicion that they're going to go that route in terms of trying to, whether they use it or not, but I think they're going to go that route as that being a possibility for treatment. But I feel like it's going to cost them something significant. It's going to cost Clark or Superman something unfathomable, or it's going to cost Lois. But if they go that route, in my opinion, there needs to be a significant cost that would be just as powerful as her death. And like, I don't want to see that. I don't want to see her death. But I sort of would like to see them grapple with, what is this cure from this antagonist going to cost?
Like a deal with the devil cure.
Right.
We're definitely going to come to that, but I feel like they're going to be resistant to it, and I don't think they're ultimately going to take it. I think it would be more interesting if they do take it, and then we see the aftermath, we see the consequences. But I just think we might see them in, kind of in the end, make some sort of ethical choice and not be willing to, sacrifice the city or give the villain some sort of tools and power, whatever, in exchange for Lois being okay.
But see, I could see Clark making that decision to take it.
Yeah.
I just could.
Yeah.
I thought the dreams that he was having were really telling, which also makes me wonder. I know he's been on Earth all this time, and I guess Kryptonians are just like everyone else, but I never really thought about Superman having dreams, right? So I just thought that was interesting, because here's my other thought. If he has dreams, then that means he has nightmares. And I'm like, if you're sleeping next to Superman and he's having a nightmare about something and he's acting it out in his dreams, he could freaking kill you.
Yep.
They should be sleeping in separate beds. Because their bed is so freaking small. It's so freaking small.
That's true. That's a really good point. Well, I ultimately, holistically, I completely agree with you. This was such an excellent episode. I loved getting to see little moments of kind of everybody coming together to support her, including, Natalie in the Watch. That was a really, heartwarming storyline. I'm really struggling with what I'm considering the C storyline, which is the Lana, Kyle, Chrissy, etc. situation. I don't care for that. I did not care for the storyline they showed with Lana slapping her daughter and that kind of thing. That felt kind of roughly handled. I wasn't crazy about that. I think that was that most of the time I trust this show with sensitive topics, and the cancer storyline is a great example of that. But the child striking thing was kind of an odd gray area, and I don't like the way they handled it. I don't like her going to Kyle at the end, and that's not even just me having a grudge against Kyle. I don't think that that's who she would have seen as a safe source. So it felt like just kind of a random thing in favor of Kyle's redemption. And again, the Kyle and Chrissy thing, and Chrissy being the one to ask Kyle to go to, it's just nothing about that is really appealing or resonating, like ringing true to the characters we've seen the first, few bits of this show. But it is what it is.
Those are the weak points.
Yeah, they are. Well, speaking of weak points, if you check out the thumbnail of this lovely live stream, you will see the one and only Miss Daisy Jones. And the finale of Daisy Jones did air this. Was it like just a few days less than a week ago type of energy?
Yeah.
We got the final 2 episodes. So Daisy Jones season 1 ? Is complete, covering, pretty much the entirety of the first book. So, Kate, I know you, like me, have been put through the ringer of reading the book and also watching this wonderful show. And I want to hear your thoughts on the finale, really the final half of the season, because we haven't caught up since then. And I kind of want to know any speculation about whether there can or should be a season 2.
So I did read the book. It's been a long time ago, so I don't remember much, but I did watch all of the second half as well, and I enjoyed it. I still think I liked the book better. I don't remember it all that much, but I remember liking it more. I remember coming away with it with a stronger enjoyment. But it was a decent show, and I was perfectly satisfied with how it ended, and I don't want a season 2 if that is in the talks. I hadn't heard any rumors of it, but it's not what I would want.
There's been some talks about season 2. I've heard the following things. Number 1, that Daisy Jones and the Six, the band performed by the, real life Riley and Sam and blah, 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 could go on tour, like do a limited series tour, playing songs from the show. And the author of the first book, or the book, has talked about what, that she's mulling over ideas as to whether or not there could be a sequel, which could include Daisy Jones and the Six, like the band, the cast that they have.
Why would you not want a season 2?
That's a great question. You go first.
Me over. So I am not a Puritan when it comes to it has to be perfect adaptation to book to movie or show. There is a lot of times where I think that changes or alterations in how information is presented through the medium actually improves the adaptation process. Get that and the other. There are decisions that sometimes are made, to really hype up the infidelity of the situation that I don't enjoy, but to each his own. What I don't enjoy is when a pretty well concluded piece of material is reopened and continued on without the author. Now, if the author writes another book and then they decide to adapt it again, like later on the line, I might be more open to that, because I've read other things of hers and I've actually liked a lot of the stuff. And if that's her perspective, if that's a genuine consideration, whether it be more following the second half of Daisy's career, or as you were talking about this, I would actually think it'd be interesting to see more from Julia's perspective, like how she as a kid saw maybe like the second half of the book, and kind of growing up in the aftermath of Daisy Jones and the Six. That would be interesting. But I don't see how they could do it in the same format because, Carey, I don't know if you know what the show's format is, but it's basically like a documentary style, it's a faux documentary. So you see both in real time stuff about the 70s band themselves, but then you also are getting tons of confessional type interviews with each individual in, I would say, like the 90s is kind of the vibe I would get, especially the age of Julia. And there's different ways I think she could like expand the story, but I don't see how they could really go fully in that same format.
Mm-hmm.
And that was very important with the book, but not as important with the show. But then they'd have to give a reason for why the show still exists without the
Mm-hmm.
confessionals.
Yeah, that's really well put. I think the story's closed. I don't think there is more to explore. And if there's a season 2, I'll absolutely watch it because I enjoy these characters and I enjoy this universe and I enjoy the music and all of that kind of stuff. But the story itself of the rise and fall of this band is closed. There's no salacious details held
Mm-hmm.
back that would necessitate an additional season. So to do an additional season, I feel like you would have to take it a direction of, we saw Julia in the 90s, for example, as you said, and that would have been late 90s if we were, and she at that point, what, I don't know, she appeared to be a college age student. She would have been about 20 years old, 20 something. If we took it to present day and she's like a struggling artist and you mix in some flashbacks throughout and you're able to bring the original cast, but then you bring in new cast around her, I could see that. And you got like a present day and then her flashing back to like memories of her childhood. I could see something to that effect. And you get to maximize the original cast, but the original cast, the original band can't front load a new story. And I hate, by the way, bringing in newbies. I hate having the newbies be the lead and the OG characters that we care about be background. We've been through that song and dance before, but in this instance, the OG characters could not carry another season, in my opinion. I would love to be proven wrong. Let's talk about that ending. And you started to touch on this, Kate, where we've talked about the infidelity is kind of blown up a little heavier. And I would say they kind of also toned down, in my opinion, the level of drugs and alcohol that were covered in the book. I think we see fewer instances of, a deathly level drug abuse. We have one main scene focused on that, whereas throughout the book, I feel like we kind of get glimpsed into multiple points of, really intense like drug and alcohol abuse. But we do see more on the infidelity end, and there's a few key pieces. Spoiler, Carey, where that occurs. First, we see Daisy and Billy actually kiss, whereas that's kind of the whole thing in the whole book is this very will they, won't they tension, whatever. But you as the reader, because you're led to care about all these characters, at least I as the reader, I'm not rooting for it. I'm rooting for what we see in the show Billy argue for, and I hate Billy, so I hate to agree with him, but I'm rooting for what he kind of
Mm-hmm.
pitches towards the end of, there's this, but we're just going to put it in the music. We're not going to blow up our lives over it. We're going to, we're going to use it to create art, but not to create an affair, whatever. So we see the kiss, we see the eventual more than that, but I think perhaps much more critically important to the story. And Kate, I want to know what you think of this. We see Camila cheat. We see her cheat first and for real, right? What did you think of that?
Mm-hmm.
And did that change how you see the outcome of this?
It it felt unnecessary. And that was what was so frustrating was if you're going to do that and you're going to have this very secret affair that is a full affair and it be something that does clearly weigh on Camille's mind, but it's so secret. Nobody knows about it. And then and that not be the focus, but instead be this one about this very public flirtation, very like intense passion, but there
Mm-hmm.
never be anything farther than a kiss. That it clearly I understand why with the whole precedent of they're two famous people versus Camille and Graham not ever being spotted publicly together, but I didn't love that. It didn't add anything to me either with the whole dynamic of what Camille was feeling. I think it does add to, I would argue Camille seemed to feel like he had already cheated on her
Yeah.
physically with Daisy before.
Which
And
is
Camille was very
bad.
much
I
more
mean,
on
he
the,
kissed her. That's still cheating. Like,
yeah, but I'm
it's
trying to
but
remember, I'm trying to remember more about the conversation about like the timing about uh it when she said it's over when you love her.
mhm.
I can't remember if that happened before or after the kiss, but either way, it's
Before,
very
I
clear
think.
she's more concerned with the emotional infidelity.
Yeah.
And he's so much more focused on preventing the physical infidelity.
Right.
And so it's so much more, there is that aspect of, I understand the contrast of Camille had a physical infidelity, clearly did not care for Graham at all, but
Mhm.
just was like needing the physical comfort, and sees an issue with it, but doesn't see it as the total betrayal that she sees Billy and Daisy's emotional affair. And there is a conversation to be had, but if you're gonna have that little flash in the pan of that being there, I think it should be explored more. But I also didn't want to have to see that because the
I
one
think
person I hate more than Billy is Graham.
oh, 100%. But I think it's interesting because we see the change between how they're showing the what we're going to call the emotional affair
Hmm.
and drugs and alcohol. And what we see is that regardless, Billy is an addict, right? So Billy is an addict, and Camilla has made her peace with that. And I even hesitate to put it that way because I think we see really unsupportive responses from her with regard to his proximity to substances. So she has, brought him, he didn't want to continue in this environment because he couldn't do the like rock and roll exposure to 70s drugs and alcohol whatever, and she pushed him to still do it because she wanted to be a rock star's wife. She knew that he was struggling with potential addiction to Daisy as well, and she still kept them together. So, to a degree, she kind of wanted to have her cake and eat it too, in the same way that Billy wanted to have his cake and eat it too. He wanted to have his stable wife and family, a wife that he loves, and his kid and whatever, but then he also wanted to be able to use this chemistry and this love that he has for Daisy in order to like create art and do this and and have these feelings. She also wanted to be able to have this like rock star wife lifestyle, and she was aware that he was an addict, but she continually, because we see her as sort of like the mother of the band, and she's telling them where to go, and she's taking the pictures, and she's bringing in all the members of the band, and she brings in Daisy into the band. We see her continually put him in situations where he's close to substances, and just because she holds a glass of champagne for him so he doesn't have to hold it at an event is not the same thing as keeping him away from his addictions or supporting him when he wants to take himself away from his addictions. So I just see a really interesting parallel there. What I struggled with this series is that in the book, I think, and maybe this is just my perception, they really won't let you find a good or bad guy. You're kind of left seeing good in all of them. And in the show, while they're all flawed characters and you see good in all of them, and they're also like pretty and charming, whatever, you do see some intentional changes in the storyline in order to shift blame, because we can't have that reunion of Billy and Daisy years later, but we also can't have that scene of them, you know, making out backstage and whatever, unless we have in our minds that Camila left. Camila had an affair. Camila has put him close to his addictions and then deserted him when he went off the cliff. Like, we're left to think that. And I don't like Billy at all, by the way. So I don't really care about his well being. But I think they intentionally take us a little further in the show on not supporting her, in my opinion.
I see your point to a degree. I would also posit that there's less of at least less of an intentional, um, both from a like them as a filmmaker, but also if you really want to read into it, Camille as a wife, thought process or intention of exposing him to drugs and alcohol. Like she saw how I read that scene where she's pushing him and saying, "You can't quit. You moved us out here." I do kind of take that as the surface level. You chose this life. You asked me to
Mhm.
follow you. I
Mhm.
have followed you. I have stuck beside you in your early trysts and let you come back. And then I got pregnant, and we're gonna do this together, and you don't get to run away.
Mhm.
And there is a level of that that I do see is far more just because she is that character. And I would say that that was true to the book character of the you don't get to run away from this. You signed up for this. You work here to stay.
Mhm.
But then would also say I do see your point that because the show almost took a lighter approach with the drugs and alcohol, they were less attentive to the implications they would have while being in every scene.
Mhm.
So they kind of took all the storylines for both Billy and Daisy and just gave them one good moment of
Yeah.
like this is their drug and alcohol problem.
Yeah.
Whereas in the book, it's consistent throughout the entire thing. And you get to see more of the inner monologue that they would have been having at that time of I want it so bad. I want it so bad, but I know it's going to ruin my life.
Mhm.
And you get to see that a little with Billy, where he's like avoiding everybody and everything else, but they focus a lot more of that addiction
Mhm.
onto each other in the
Yeah.
show.
Which is
And
honestly so much nicer to see. I mean, like, if we're just being honest, I would much rather see like fun, toxic, dangerous chemistry and flirting and music and pretty people staring at each other, whatever, than see people, pop pills and get drunk. I'm sorry. Like, we see both in this show, but
mm,
if we're gonna see a bit more of one than the
mhm,
other, like, sure, I'll take it. Like, I I was initially a little not shocked, but a little put off on the whole like, oh, they've increased the infidelity from technically not infidelity to technically definitely infidel. Well, I don't know. I mean, I guess actually if we were to do a timeline, it may just be the kiss, which is like still cheating, but then you've got the Camila. I don't know. Whatever. They've increased it, which is a little like, ooh, okay. But more fun to watch than them dying in the shower. So there's that. Let's
yeah,
let's make
I
sure. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think I preferred the book generally because I liked the more equal of a focus
Yeah.
on the things that we were talking about. But like I said earlier, I kind of think like if we had 5 or 6 scenes with her in the shower overdose, it would have gotten one old and emotionally draining because it is a very high emotion thing.
Yeah.
But you're also not going to get like the mainstream public audience to watch it as much either because they know marketing. They know it's going to get people in seats, quote unquote, and they know that toxic relationships and love triangles are going to be far more eye grabbing than woman laying in the sink or in the shower 3 times.
Absolutely. And it was. So like it's not even so much a sex sells as it is like a
Hmm.
chemistry and toxicity sells, but that was, part and parcel to the book
Hmm.
and for whatever they changed it was still the entire time it was lovely. Of screen glue. Carrie, I heard you started watching a show that Kate and I have been chatting about these last few weeks, and I want to make sure we snag a few minutes in here to pick your brain, no The Last of Us mushroom head pun intended, about what you thought about it.
So here's the deal, right? I'm woefully behind. I just finished watching like the first episode. That's it, right? So I'm baseline.
Yeah.
What was incredibly jarring to me was obviously like when the onset of this thing happens, and of course the fallout from that, and then of course you get like the screen, and it's like 20 years later,
Mhm.
and I'm like, wait a minute. So my question is, I have to assume that did have during the course of the season, do they just sort of pick and choose through flashbacks to any degree to sort of fill in the blanks of what happened during those 20 years? Because it doesn't always translate well onto the screen, but I'm always sort of interested in sort of um, world building and how foundations get built and how things sort of come into play. Because it was like, bam, 20 years later, and now we have this sort of military sort of situation set up, and I'm just intrigued as to how that happened. And I'm just wondering, do we ever get that explanation to any degree, or is it a situation where they're like, you know what? um, that can be laborious to sort of translate on screen, and we like people to use their imagination for that.
Yes, they absolutely do have flashbacks. I'll start with that. However, the flashbacks are not always only to the exact year 20-year moment where we see, the whole thing kind of fall apart and the world ends and his daughter dies and all that kind of stuff. We get flashbacks throughout. We get flashbacks for multiple characters. We get flashbacks for side characters. We get flashbacks to 5 years ago or to 10 years ago or to when Ellie, was maybe just 2 years ago from then. We get flashbacks to maybe even the start of Ellie's life. So there's a lot of things throughout the season where they give you flashbacks, but it doesn't answer all the questions. It's there just as, I guess I would say, world building. Kate, would you agree?
What was the question?
Are there flashbacks on The Last of Us in order to world build, or are we stuck with this 20-year gap?
Okay. Yeah, there's definitely flashbacks, but the world building of this, it is intentionally just kind of hand wavy. Um, there, I will say there is an intentionality and thought process that actually kind of would occasionally surprise me, that I'll have to admit, like how much they considered, okay, this is how they would get supplies from here to here, and like this would be this infrastructure that we could have gotten working in 20 years, and this is the infrastructure that still wouldn't be working because we wouldn't be focused on getting that back to up. Like that level of that, there is a level of also conversations about small day-to-day details that, like in a lot of apocalypse stuff, we don't get to see, that was translated. So, and you get that in both modern storyline and flashback, but the actual, initial fallout of the apocalypse happening basically is kind of hand wavy set dressing for the actual story, which is about grief and loss and what you're willing to do to protect the people you love, and the moral gray lines that you would at one point hold and what you'd be willing to cross to get there.
That's a
Yeah,
really good summary.
yeah, because I don't necessarily need to get lost in the minutia, right? But it was just sort of jarring to see it because it made me think about one of I stopped watching The Walking Dead long before it ended. But
Same.
one of the things, yeah, but one of the things that drew me into Fear the Walking Dead was the expressed purpose was that they were going to show this outbreak like initially in the early years, and that sort of intrigued me and drew me in. And now, long story short, they said, "Screw that. That's no one wants to get lost in that minutia." I'm apparently the only one who does. Um, so when I saw that 20-year jump, I was like, okay, so now they have this sort of sense of institutions and infrastructure and money system and all those things. And I'm like, those are the kinds of things that I didn't necessarily go into this show saying that I need to see that, but it would just sort of be nice to sort of get that sort of feel for how those things came to be. And the flashbacks may do it, and it just may be that you gain those through context of watching the show. For me, watching the next few episodes, but it was just like 20 years, man. That's a freaking long time to just be like, we're jumping, screw you. And I was like, okay, I'm going to need a little bit of something.
I think
going
by the
forward?
end of
You tell me how
episode
to get there.
3, you're going to have a good idea of the level of the show that is, flashbacks or world building, and how flashbacks are used in order to answer some questions and create others. I think if you once you get to the end of episode 3, all of your understanding of the show format will change, in my opinion, or at least for me, that was my experience. And I think we heard a lot of that online as well as this was airing. And I hope you're like, to some degree, unspoiled. I'm not gonna, spoil too much, or, anything we said previously went in one ear and out the other. But yeah, give it till then.
Yeah, no, and I'm not worried about spoilers. I mean, I don't need to know like point for point, but I'm more interested, and I'm always one of those people who's more interested in the journey than the destination. So it's like you can
Mhm.
tell me how we got here, but or you can tell me where we got, but I at least want to be able to see how they got there. So that's what I'm interested in. And the show had me hooked in the first 5 minutes. I've just been lazy about watching it. That's all.
I want to hear all of your thoughts in 2 weeks when we come back to this and you are inevitably caught up on the show,
That is the
for
plan.
sure. Well, another thing that we've caught up on, and I know we have very few minutes to get through it, but we just cannot go through today without talking about the question mark final season of Shadow and Bone, and also Six of Crows. 5 books in one season. It's no problem.
Mhm.
We'll definitely give that justice and not throw all the best characters under the bus. I'll just be real. I did not care for a lot of the choices in the entire Shadow and Bone season. There was a moment I had to actually pause, pick my jaw up off the floor, and consult with Peter on why this looked like it was edited by high schoolers as their like senior film project. There is a huge budget discrepancy across the various sets, and I was left not wanting anything in terms of like a Six of Crows season to follow. There were a few moments I might kind of enjoy, but overall, this season was an embarrassment. And Mal and his entire storyline and the self aggrandization and the putting Mal up on a pedestal really felt like one of the critical key pieces to all that happening. So that's all I have to say. What do you have to say?
Mhm. I'll just say this. I have previously been like a lackluster, half-hearted Mal defender only because I never really buy into the villain
Right.
romance storyline. And that's usually Mal versus Nikolai. Oh my gosh. I despised it. Um, Also, I this is actually one of the book series I don't mind that they've changed a ton
Mhm.
because the first trilogy was one of her first book trilogy. Then the two spin-off duologies, they're feeding some of that stuff in. All great and dandy. I would say that her two duology spin-offs are better than the initial trilogy, but it has a lot of world building that's super important, and it does have a core story which is really interesting, but there's a lot of character work that kind of flops and falls flat, and I do appreciate that they've kind of tossed a lot of it
Mhm.
in this adaptation. But I
Character work that
also don't
flops and falls flat, like the Darkling. What
yes.
what happened in season
Yeah.
2?
I didn't like him. I never will like him, but you're really talking him up like he's one of the biggest, scariest villains of all time. And you can even have like a big scary villain experiencing a lot of physical pain due to his evil creatures
Mhm.
and make him intimidating. And instead, they made him seem like a kicked puppy a
Yeah.
lot of the time. And that's not intimidating. Uh, Thankfully, they didn't make that other flip side of Alina. A lot of the time in the book, she was headstrong and like sassy leader girl to a point of being irritating. They didn't really get to that in this, but then they also dropped the ball in like how they adapted the whatever they're called magical amplifiers they dropped the ball in making that better. They seemed like they were trying to, and then they still had it be Mal, and then he could have been dead, and that could have actually given him like a martyr's end. I'm like, you know, make people like him more, but at least he's not here
And they
anymore.
gave him the best of all worlds in terms of ending.
Yes.
They gave him the martyrs and they have him be the magical thing she needs to be powerful, which, like, gag. They have him literally rise from the dead and then run off with a bunch of cute people on a pirate ship to go be the pirate that he dreamed of being. This entire
Hmm.
season, this entire world, which is supposed to revolve around this duology of light and darkness, and, you know, shadow and bone, and this idea of the ethereal and the, you know, the terrain on which they live, and what is, you know, what is real around us and what is imagined and created around us. This entire thing ends up revolving just around taking this kid and giving him a happy ending, this man, and giving him a
Hmm.
happy ending. And here's the problem I have with that. Full offense, he's not even a good actor. He's very lovely. Great job. Like, does not care about my opinion. That's so fine. But the character and the actor, not great. By all accounts, and far be it from me to praise a man, Ben Barnes is absolutely the strongest actor on this and has the most extensive filmography and has the most interesting character and the whole thing, right? He came into this as the face of this, taking his character as the Darkling and depowering him and making him like creepy and old and unpleasant. His scenes are so low budget, it's ridiculous.
Hmm.
Like, just the sets
It's on.
around him and everything really brought this whole season down. And we can't see
It's on.
Alina as this powerful ending, if this powerful hero in the end, if her villain
Hmm.
has been so depowered to where we have no respect for him, we have no fear for him. It's not a satisfying ending for her or for Mal or for whoever you care about, you know?
Yeah. Well, and to kind of go on the visual standpoint too, it wasn't always consistently with one group or the other either having visual issues. I cannot stand that they've decided to give her light blue, like the color of her light being blue, because
Right.
if you're a sun summoner, your light's orange, and it's such a small detail, but it drives me absolutely
No,
crazy
literally.
because it looks cheap. It looks like CW lightning.
Hmm.
Like, I cannot stand it. Um, there was certain aspects though that, like, the costuming consistently is fantastic because that is all completely hand done, or like individually done, each piece, you can
Hmm.
tell they are all well made. And so I appreciate how much attention is made into at least the consideration of what the costume is. Some of them look a little weird, but the consideration of the costuming. And then you have a nearly empty set saying that there's thousands of people, and I'm like, that's hard to believe. um the probably the best scene in the entire season was the scene where they're trying to hold back the Darkling's troops from entering the fort,
Hmm.
and it's because there's limited CGI, except for, like, a lot of practical effects.
Hmm.
And it also kind of revolves around the more likable characters. It
Right.
involves mainly Nikolai. And,
Nikolai was fantastic. Jenya,
yeah,
also great. Laughable sequence of throwing a light line on her face and being like, "This is Jenya ugly."
yeah, I
No,
love
this is
Jinya.
Jenya beautiful with a line on her face. Like, get over yourself. Hot take that I know for a fact not a
Hmm.
single person agrees with me on. Six of Crows should not have been in this entire first two seasons. Not even a bit. We should have got maybe a background glimpse of them towards the end of the second season or so, but absolutely not. The time and energy that went into these wonderful characters
Hmm.
who, if you didn't read the books, are probably like the stars of the show for you, and they're great and they're cute, whatever. The time and energy that went into them and did not do service to their storyline, and they likely will not get a spinoff because of it, completely hurt the entire actual Shadow and Bone
Yeah,
storyline. And I know I'm like a million minutes over, but that's my take that nobody, I'm sure,
I
will agree with.
I'll just piggyback on it and say I kind of agree. I still love Nina and Matthias. But then like this season they weren't together at all, and you
Right.
basically just got to see him punch people in the face and get mad. But the
Mhm.
first season was great. I love them in the books. They're my favorite characters in the books.
And they have
Just
such good
okay.
chemistry too. Like
Yes, they
the
do.
actors, I saw like there was a video going viral of their chemistry test, which was lovely. This was great casting. These were great characters. I sure wish they had a season, but because they did not wait to give them a season
Mhm.
when it was their time to have a season, they will not get a season. And that's my problem with the entire integration of the Six of Crows thing. I think they had them in there because they didn't want to go through all of Shadow and Bone over the course of, maybe like 2 short seasons for the 3 books, maybe change a bit with Shadow and Bone a little bit more. Probably should have changed it more. And then go to Six of Crows, having fed little bits of the characters. They wanted to kind of bring them in too early, and it did nobody a service. We're 6 minutes over time. Everybody go watch Succession. It has 1 episode out now. The next episode comes out next Sunday. It's the final season. It is such excellent television. I have no time to talk about it today. But go watch that instead of, I guess, Love is Blind. But maybe watch that too. As we speak, the Riverdale season has just finished kicking off. And I know I may be one of the last people to watch it, but if you watch The Flash tonight, you will have seen a very interesting trailer for Riverdale wherein they flash a title card with the words, "There's no need to catch up." Yeah, because the season like starts afresh in like the 60s where they're all like teenagers having threesomes in the 50s or 60s or something like that. So that sounds
Might be
fun and
something.
fresh. Yeah, final season, go out with lots of bangs. Any parting words before we reconvene on 412 to talk about, well, Riverdale
Mhm.
and other things?
None
Watch
from
Gotham
me.
Knights. You might be surprised.
What was that, Carey?
I said watch Gotham Knight. Gotham Knights. You might be surprised.
I mean, it's going to raise the bar a little higher than Riverdale at the very, very least. I do have Gotham Knights on my list. I do want to watch it. Well, thank you all for staying 8 minutes over with me. Kate and Carrie's information's in the description down below. If you want more information about their thoughts on The Last of Us, Daisy Jones, Shadow and Bone, etc., pick Kate's brain on Shadow and Bone in particular. She has good thoughts, and we got like 2% of the iceberg tonight.
Mhm.
I will talk to you guys in 2 weeks. Bye.